Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her dress uniform one final time before stepping out of her small apartment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military housing complex as she walked toward the base shuttle stop. At 28 years old, Maria had spent the last 10 years serving her country with unwavering dedication, but today felt different. Today marked the beginning of what would become the most challenging and transformative period of her military career. The shuttle ride to headquarters was quiet, filled with the usual mix of junior enlisted personnel heading to their daily assignments. Maria sat near the back, her service ribbons catching the light that filtered through the windows. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Action Badge, and several others decorated her chest, each one representing moments of courage and sacrifice that most people would never fully understand. Yet as she looked around the shuttle, she noticed the familiar pattern that had followed her throughout her career. Eyes would glance at her ribbons, then quickly look away, as if the decorations were somehow less meaningful because of who wore them. The base medical center where Maria had been assigned 3 months earlier was a massive complex serving thousands of active duty personnel and their families. As one of the few female combat veterans working in the administrative wing, she found herself occupying a unique but often isolating position. The other staff members were polite but distant, their interactions limited to necessary work communications. Maria had grown accustomed to this treatment over the years, but it never stopped stinging. Her supervisor, Captain Reynolds, was a desk officer who had never deployed overseas. Despite Maria's extensive combat experience and multiple commendations, he treated her like any other clerk, assigning her routine paperwork and dismissing her suggestions for improving department efficiency. During staff meetings, her voice seemed to carry no weight, her ideas met with polite nods that led nowhere. It was as if her Purple Heart and Bronze Star were invisible to those around her. The morning routine at the medical center began like any other. Maria arrived early, as was her habit, and began reviewing the daily assignment logs. The administrative office buzzed with the familiar sounds of keyboards clicking and phones ringing. Her desk, positioned in a corner near the filing cabinets, offered her a clear view of the main entrance and the comings and goings of personnel throughout the day. Specialist Johnson, a young man fresh out of basic training, hurried past her desk carrying a stack of medical files. He had been working in the department for 2 weeks, but had never once acknowledged Maria's presence beyond the minimum required military courtesy. Like many others, he seemed to see her as just another face in the crowd, despite her higher rank and obvious combat experience. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm until around 10 o'clock, when an unexpected announcement echoed through the building's intercom system. A visiting delegation of senior military officials would be touring the facility, and all personnel were expected to maintain the highest standards of military bearing and appearance. The news sent a ripple of nervous energy through the office as everyone began straightening their uniforms and organizing their workspaces. Captain Reynolds emerged from his office, his expression tense with the kind of anxiety that came with surprise inspections. He began issuing rapid-fire instructions to the staff, emphasizing the importance of making a good impression on the visiting officials. As he spoke, his eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on Maria before continuing to the other staff members. The message was clear. Everyone needed to be on their best behavior, but some were more important to the overall impression than others. Maria continued her work with quiet professionalism, organizing medical records and updating patient files with the same attention to detail she had always maintained. Her movements were economical and precise, habits formed during countless hours of military training and refined through multiple combat deployments. While others around her seemed increasingly nervous about the impending visit, Maria remained calm and focused. The first sign of the delegation's arrival came in the form of increased activity in the main corridor. Security personnel took their positions, and the usual bustle of the medical center seemed to intensify. Maria could hear the distant sounds of formal greetings and military courtesy being exchanged as the visiting officials made their way through different sections of the facility. As the delegation moved closer to the administrative wing, the atmosphere in the office became almost electric with tension. Captain Reynolds positioned himself near the entrance, ready to greet the visitors and provide whatever information they might require. The other staff members arranged themselves at their desks, trying to appear busy and professional while simultaneously straining to catch glimpses of the approaching group. Through the large windows that separated the administrative office from the main corridor, Maria could see the delegation approaching. Several high-ranking officers walked together, their uniforms immaculate and their bearing unmistakably that of senior military leadership. Leading the group was a figure who immediately commanded attention. A tall, distinguished man whose uniform displayed the 4 stars of a full general. The delegation paused outside the administrative office, and Maria could see Captain Reynolds straightening his shoulders as he prepared to receive them. The general's presence seemed to fill the corridor, his very bearing speaking of decades of military service and the weight of enormous responsibility. Even from her desk, Maria could sense the aura of authority and experience that surrounded him. As the group entered the administrative office, the normal sounds of daily work ceased entirely. Captain Reynolds snapped to attention and delivered a crisp greeting, welcoming the delegation and offering to provide any assistance they might need. The general nodded politely, his sharp eyes already beginning to scan the office and its occupants. The tour began with Captain Reynolds explaining the various functions of the administrative wing. He spoke about processing efficiency, patient record management, and the dedicated staff who kept the medical center running smoothly. As he talked, the general and his accompanying officers moved through the office, observing the work being done and occasionally stopping to ask questions. Maria remained at her desk, continuing her work while maintaining an awareness of the delegation's movement through the office. She had been through enough inspections and visits to know that the best approach was usually to continue working professionally while being ready to respond if addressed directly. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as she updated medical records, her focus seemingly entirely on the task at hand. The general paused at several desks during his tour, speaking briefly with different staff members and asking about their roles and responsibilities. His questions were thoughtful and demonstrated a genuine interest in understanding how the facility operated. Unlike many senior officers who seemed to go through the motions during such visits, this general appeared to be genuinely engaged with what he was seeing. As the delegation moved deeper into the office, Maria noticed that the general's attention seemed to be drawn to details that others might miss. He observed not just the obvious aspects of the operation, but also the subtle signs of efficiency, organization, and professional competence. His questions revealed a depth of understanding about military administration that came only from extensive experience. The tour continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Captain Reynolds maintaining a running commentary about the department's capabilities and achievements. The other officers in the delegation asked occasional questions, but it was clear that the general was the focal point of the visit. His presence dominated the room not through any obvious display of authority, but through the quiet confidence and unmistakable competence that marked truly exceptional military leaders. Throughout the visit, Maria remained focused on her work, her desk positioned in a location that allowed her to observe without being intrusive. She had learned long ago that combat veterans like herself were often overlooked in administrative settings, their contributions valued less than those of personnel who fit more conventional expectations. It was a reality she had accepted, even if she had never entirely made peace with it. The general's tour seemed to be winding down when something unexpected happened. As the delegation prepared to move on to the next section of the facility, the general's attention was caught by something on Maria's desk. From across the room, his experienced eyes had spotted the distinctive purple ribbon of the Purple Heart among the decorations on her uniform. The general paused mid-conversation with Captain Reynolds, his attention now entirely focused on Maria. The years of military service had trained him to recognize the significance of certain decorations, and the Purple Heart was one that commanded immediate respect from any true military professional. What captured his attention even more was the combination of decorations he could see: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Action Badge, and several others that told the story of a soldier who had seen real combat and performed with distinction. Captain Reynolds followed the general's gaze, his expression shifting from confident tour guide mode to something approaching confusion. He had not expected the visiting general to show interest in Maria, whom he had largely treated as just another administrative clerk. The moment stretched out as the general continued to study Maria's ribbons from across the room, his expression thoughtful and increasingly focused. The other members of the delegation also turned their attention toward Maria's corner of the office, following their leader's gaze. The atmosphere in the room began to shift as it became clear that something significant was happening, though most of the office staff had no idea what had captured the general's attention. Maria, still focused on her computer screen, remained unaware of the scrutiny she was receiving. Her attention was devoted to updating a complex medical file, her fingers moving efficiently across the keyboard as she ensured that every detail was accurate and complete. It was the same professional competence she had brought to every assignment throughout her military career, regardless of how others perceived or valued her contributions. The general took a step in Maria's direction, his movement subtle but purposeful. Captain Reynolds, uncertain about what was happening but recognizing the need to follow his distinguished visitor's lead, began to move in the same direction. The rest of the delegation followed, creating a slowly building sense of anticipation in the office. As the group approached her desk, Maria finally became aware of the attention she was receiving. She looked up from her computer screen to find the four-star general and his delegation standing nearby, their focus entirely on her. For a moment, confusion flickered across her features as she tried to understand why the visiting officials had singled her out. The general's eyes met hers, and in that instant, Maria saw something she had rarely encountered in her military career. Recognition. Not the polite acknowledgement that came with military courtesy, but the deeper recognition that one combat veteran gives to another. The general's experienced gaze took in her ribbons, her bearing, and the unmistakable signs of a soldier who had faced real danger and proven herself under fire. What happened next would change not only Maria's day, but her entire perspective on her place within the military community. The general's expression shifted from casual interest to something approaching reverence as he fully processed what he was seeing. This was not just another administrative clerk wearing a few standard ribbons. This was a combat veteran whose decorations told a story of courage, sacrifice, and dedication that demanded respect from any true military professional. The office had fallen completely silent now, with every staff member aware that something important was happening, even if they didn't understand what it was. Captain Reynolds stood nearby, his earlier confidence replaced by a growing sense that he might have fundamentally misunderstood something about one of his staff members. The delegation waited quietly as their leader processed what he was seeing and decided how to respond. Maria rose to her feet, following proper military protocol when addressed by a senior officer. As she stood, the full display of her ribbons became clearly visible to everyone in the office. The Purple Heart, awarded to those wounded in combat. The Bronze Star, recognizing heroic achievement in a combat zone. The Combat Action Badge, indicating direct engagement with enemy forces. Together, they painted a picture of military service that most of the office staff had never fully recognized or appreciated. The general stepped closer, his movement deliberate and respectful. Years of military experience had taught him to read the stories that ribbons told, and Maria's story was one that commanded his complete attention and respect. What he saw was not just a collection of decorations, but a testament to service, sacrifice, and courage that represented the very best of the military tradition he had spent his life serving. The silence in the administrative office stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. General Harrison studied Maria's ribbons with the practiced eye of a career military officer who understood exactly what each decoration represented. The Purple Heart alone was enough to command respect, but the combination of awards painted a picture of sustained combat excellence that was rare in any setting, let alone in an administrative office of a medical facility. Staff Sergeant Santos, the general said, reading her name tag with a voice that carried the authority of decades in service. His tone was formal but warm, the kind of address that one professional soldier gives to another when recognition is due. I couldn't help but notice your decorations. Would you mind telling me about your service? The question sent a ripple of surprise through the office. Captain Reynolds' face showed clear confusion as he tried to process why a four-star general was showing such interest in what he considered a routine administrative clerk. The other staff members exchanged glances, suddenly seeing Maria in a completely different light. For months, they had worked alongside her without truly seeing her, and now the most senior officer any of them had ever encountered was treating her with obvious respect and genuine interest. Maria straightened her shoulders, falling naturally into the bearing that had served her well throughout her military career. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady and professional. "I served 3 deployments in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division, sir. 2 tours in Kandahar Province and 1 in Helmand Province. My MOS was 11B Infantry." The general nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious as he processed this information. Infantry soldiers, especially those with multiple combat deployments, represented the sharp edge of military service. The fact that Maria had not only served in this capacity, but had earned significant decorations while doing so, spoke volumes about her capabilities and dedication. "The Purple Heart," General Harrison continued, his eyes focusing on the distinctive purple ribbon with its white edges. "Would you mind sharing the circumstances if you're comfortable doing so?" Maria's expression remained composed, though those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she was accessing difficult memories. "IED strike on our convoy outside Kandahar, sir. July 15th, 2019. We were escorting medical supplies to a forward operating base when we hit a roadside bomb. I was the gunner on the lead vehicle." The details were delivered in the matter-of-fact tone that combat veterans often used when discussing traumatic events. There was no drama or emotional appeal in her words, just the straightforward recounting of facts that had shaped her military experience and earned her one of the nation's most respected military decorations. Captain Reynolds found himself listening with growing amazement to a story he had never heard, despite working with Maria for 3 months. The woman he had assigned routine filing tasks and treated as just another desk clerk had been wounded in combat while serving her country in one of the most dangerous assignments the military had to offer. "And the Bronze Star?" the general asked, his respect for Maria clearly growing with each detail he learned about her service. "Same deployment, sir. 3 weeks after I returned to duty following my injuries," Maria replied. "Our patrol came under heavy fire while providing security for a medical evacuation. The helicopter was taking fire and couldn't land safely. I provided covering fire and helped establish a secure perimeter that allowed the evacuation to proceed. We extracted 2 critically wounded soldiers under enemy fire." The Bronze Star was awarded for heroic achievement in combat situations, and Maria's description painted a picture of courage under fire that was extraordinary even by military standards. The fact that she had returned to combat duty after being wounded and then performed heroically again spoke to a level of dedication and courage that few people possessed. General Harrison's expression showed deep respect as he absorbed Maria's account of her service. Around the office, the other staff members listened in stunned silence as they learned about the true background of someone they had barely acknowledged for months. The purple-haired young specialist who delivered files, the captain who had treated her like any other clerk, the various administrative personnel who had worked alongside her without ever asking about her background. All of them were beginning to understand that they had been in the presence of genuine heroism without realizing it. "Staff Sergeant," the general said, his voice carrying a note of formality that indicated something significant was about to happen. "Would you step out into the corridor with me for a moment?" The request sent another wave of surprise through the office. Captain Reynolds looked uncertain about whether he should follow, but the general's body language made it clear that this was a private conversation between 2 soldiers who shared an understanding that others in the room could not fully appreciate. Maria followed the general out into the main corridor, with the rest of his delegation maintaining a respectful distance. The hallway was quieter than the office, providing a space where they could speak without the scrutiny of the administrative staff who were still trying to process what they had just learned about their colleague. "Staff Sergeant Santos," General Harrison began, his tone now more personal than it had been in the office. "I want you to know that I've been in the Army for 32 years, and I can count on one hand the number of soldiers I've met with your combination of combat experience and decorations. What you've accomplished in service to your country is exceptional." Maria maintained her military bearing, but the general could see the impact his words were having. For someone who had spent months being overlooked and undervalued, recognition from such a senior officer was both validating and emotionally powerful. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Maria replied, using the modest response that was typical of soldiers who had performed exceptionally under difficult circumstances. "My unit, my battle buddies, we all looked out for each other. I was lucky to be in a position to help." The general smiled slightly at her response, recognizing the humility that often characterized true heroes. That's exactly the kind of attitude I'd expect from someone with your record. But I want you to understand something, Staff Sergeant. What you did in Afghanistan wasn't just your job. It was extraordinary service that saved lives and upheld the finest traditions of the United States Army. The conversation continued for several minutes, with the general asking detailed questions about Maria's combat experiences and her transition to her current assignment. His questions revealed not just professional interest but genuine concern for her welfare and career development. It became clear that he saw in Maria the kind of soldier the Army needed to recognize and nurture, not overlook and underutilize. "Tell me about your current assignment," General Harrison said, his tone indicating that he already suspected the answer might not reflect Maria's true capabilities. Maria chose her words carefully, maintaining professional courtesy while being honest about her situation. "I'm assigned to Medical Records Administration, sir. Updating patient files, managing documentation, general clerical duties. It's good work, sir, and I'm grateful for the assignment." The general's expression showed that he understood exactly what Maria wasn't saying. Her diplomatic response couldn't hide the fact that someone with her combat experience and leadership capabilities was being significantly underutilized in a routine administrative role. The waste of talent and experience was obvious to someone with his background and understanding of military personnel management. "Staff Sergeant, I'm going to be direct with you," the general said, his tone becoming more serious. "From what I can see, your talents and experience are not being fully utilized in your current position. That's not a criticism of your performance or attitude. It's a recognition that the Army sometimes fails to properly match exceptional soldiers with assignments that reflect their true capabilities." Maria listened carefully, uncertain where the conversation was heading, but recognizing that the general was speaking from genuine concern for her career and welfare. His words carried the weight of someone who had spent decades managing military personnel and understood the complexities of career development within the service. "I'd like to ask you a question, and I want you to give me an honest answer," General Harrison continued. "If you could have any assignment in the Army right now, based on your interests and capabilities, what would it be?" The question caught Maria slightly off guard. After months of being treated as just another administrative worker, she hadn't given much thought to what she might actually want to do with her military career. The assumption had been that her combat days were behind her, and that administrative work was simply her new reality. "Sir, I've always been interested in training and mentorship," Maria replied after a moment of consideration. "During my deployments, I worked with a lot of young soldiers who were experiencing combat for the first time, helping them develop the skills and confidence they needed to succeed and survive. That was some of the most rewarding work I did." The general nodded, clearly pleased with her response. "That makes perfect sense, given your background and experience. Have you ever considered a role in military education or training development?" The question opened possibilities that Maria hadn't seriously contemplated in months. Her current assignment had been presented as a routine posting that would utilize her administrative skills, but no one had ever asked about her interests, ambitions, or the unique perspective she could bring to other types of military work. "I have thought about it, sir," Maria replied honestly, "but I wasn't sure how to pursue those kinds of opportunities or whether my current experience would be relevant." General Harrison's expression showed both understanding and determination. "Staff Sergeant, your combat experience, your decorations, and your demonstrated ability to perform under pressure make you exactly the kind of person the Army needs in training and development roles. Young soldiers heading into combat zones need instructors and mentors who have been where they're going and who can prepare them for the realities they'll face." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a member of the general's staff, who reminded him quietly that the delegation was running behind schedule for their next appointment. The general acknowledged the information but didn't immediately end his conversation with Maria. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he said, pulling out a business card and writing something on the back. "I want you to call this number tomorrow morning. Ask to speak with Colonel Martinez in Personnel Development. Tell her that General Harrison referred you for a conversation about training and education opportunities. She'll know what that means." Maria accepted the card with surprise and gratitude, though she wasn't entirely sure what to expect from the referral. The general's intervention had already exceeded anything she might have hoped for when she woke up that morning. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you," Maria began, but the general raised a hand to interrupt her. "Staff Sergeant, you've already thanked me and every other American through your service to this country. What I'm doing is simply ensuring that the Army properly recognizes and utilizes the exceptional soldiers it has the privilege to serve alongside." As they prepared to return to the administrative office, the general paused for one more comment. "I want you to remember something, Staff Sergeant Santos. Your value as a soldier and as a person isn't determined by how others treat you or whether they recognize your contributions. Your decorations speak for themselves, and they tell a story of courage, dedication, and service that commands respect from anyone who understands what they represent." When they re-entered the office, the atmosphere had completely changed. Captain Reynolds and the rest of the staff watched with obvious curiosity and newly awakened respect as the general concluded his conversation with Maria. The routine administrative office had been transformed by the recognition that they had been working alongside a genuine war hero without realizing it. The general's delegation prepared to continue their tour of the facility, but before leaving, he turned to address Captain Reynolds directly. "Captain, I want you to know that you have an exceptional soldier working in your department. Staff Sergeant Santos's combat record and decorations represent the kind of service and sacrifice that makes the Army strong. I trust that her talents and experience will be properly recognized and utilized." The message was diplomatically delivered but unmistakably clear. Captain Reynolds nodded formally, though his expression suggested he was still processing the implications of what he had learned about one of his staff members. As the delegation prepared to leave, something extraordinary happened that would become the defining moment of the entire visit. General Harrison paused at the entrance to the administrative office, his hand resting momentarily on the doorframe as if he was weighing an important decision. The delegation stood behind him, waiting for his signal to continue their tour, but something in the general's demeanor suggested that this moment wasn't quite finished. He turned back toward Maria, who had returned to her desk and was attempting to resume her work, despite the extraordinary attention she had just received. The other staff members watched from their positions throughout the office, still processing the revelation that they had been working alongside a decorated combat veteran for months without truly seeing her. "Staff Sergeant Santos," the general called out, his voice carrying clearly across the office. Maria immediately stood and turned to face him, falling naturally into the position of attention that was second nature to any experienced soldier. What happened next would be remembered by everyone in that office for the rest of their careers. General Harrison, a four-star officer who commanded respect from tens of thousands of soldiers, slowly and deliberately brought his right hand to his forehead in a crisp military salute. The gesture was extraordinary not just because of the general's rank, but because of what it represented. Military protocol typically required junior personnel to salute senior officers, not the reverse. When a senior officer saluted a subordinate, it was a sign of the deepest respect and recognition, an acknowledgement that rank alone didn't determine who deserved honor. Maria's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected gesture, but her military training took over immediately. She returned the salute with the same crisp precision that had been drilled into her during countless hours of military instruction, her bearing reflecting the pride and professionalism that had carried her through multiple combat deployments. The salute lasted for several seconds, a silent communication between two soldiers that transcended rank and spoke to the mutual respect that existed between those who had truly served their country. In that moment, Maria was not a staff sergeant receiving recognition from a general. She was a combat veteran being honored by a fellow warrior who understood exactly what her sacrifices had meant. The office had fallen completely silent. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as he witnessed an exchange that challenged everything he thought he understood about military hierarchy and respect. Specialist Johnson, who had spent weeks walking past Maria's desk without acknowledgement, stared in amazement as he watched the Army's senior leadership honor someone he had barely noticed. When the salute concluded, General Harrison's expression was serious but warm. "Staff Sergeant Santos, it has been an honor to meet you. Your service to this nation has been exceptional, and I want to ensure that everyone here understands the caliber of soldier they have the privilege to work alongside." The general's words carried clearly throughout the office, ensuring that every staff member heard his assessment of Maria's character and service. It was both a recognition of her achievements and a gentle but firm message to her colleagues about the respect she deserved. "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the emotional impact of the moment. "It's been an honor to serve, sir." General Harrison nodded once more, then turned to address the entire office. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember what you've witnessed here today. The United States Army is made strong by soldiers like Staff Sergeant Santos, who have faced danger with courage and served with distinction. These are the men and women who defend our freedom and uphold our values, and they deserve our deepest respect and gratitude." The speech was brief but powerful, delivered with the authority of someone who had spent 3 decades in military service and understood exactly what he was talking about. Every person in the office felt the weight of his words and the implicit challenge to examine their own attitudes and assumptions about the people they worked with. As the delegation finally prepared to leave, several of the officers who had accompanied the general approached Maria individually. Colonel Williams, the deputy commander, stopped to shake her hand and thank her for her service. Major Chen, a logistics officer, expressed her admiration for Maria's combat record and encouraged her to pursue the training opportunities the general had mentioned. The procession of senior officers offering their respect and gratitude created an atmosphere unlike anything the administrative office had ever experienced. Maria found herself receiving the kind of recognition and appreciation that had been absent from her military experience for months, and the effect was both overwhelming and deeply meaningful. After the delegation departed, the office remained unusually quiet for several minutes. The normal sounds of keyboards and conversations were replaced by a contemplative silence as everyone processed what they had witnessed. The routine administrative environment had been transformed by the recognition that heroism and exceptional service could exist in unexpected places. Captain Reynolds was the first to approach Maria's desk after the delegation left. His expression showed a mixture of embarrassment and genuine respect as he tried to find the right words to address someone he realized he had fundamentally misjudged. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he began, his tone far more respectful than any previous interaction they had shared. "I want to apologize. I had no idea about your background or your combat experience. I should have taken the time to learn about your service record and recognize your capabilities." Maria's response reflected the professionalism and grace that had characterized her throughout her military career. "Thank you, sir. I understand that combat experience isn't always relevant to administrative duties. I've been happy to contribute wherever the Army needs me." But Captain Reynolds shook his head, clearly troubled by his own oversight. "That's not the point. Staff Sergeant, your experience, your perspective, your proven leadership abilities, those are assets that should be recognized and utilized regardless of your current assignment. I fail to see that, and I want to do better." The conversation marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in how Maria was perceived and treated within the department. Over the following days, her colleagues began approaching her with questions about her military experience, seeking her input on matters that they had previously handled without considering her perspective. Specialist Johnson, who had barely acknowledged her existence for weeks, stopped by her desk to apologize for his previous behavior and to ask if she would be willing to mentor him as he prepared for his first deployment. The young soldier's recognition that he had been ignoring someone who could provide invaluable guidance was both humbling and educational. The phone call that Maria made the following morning to Colonel Martinez opened doors that had seemed permanently closed. The conversation revealed opportunities within military education and training that would utilize her combat experience and leadership abilities in ways that her current assignment never could. Colonel Martinez explained that the Army was actively seeking experienced combat veterans to develop and deliver training programs for soldiers preparing for deployment. Maria's combination of infantry experience, combat decorations, and proven ability to perform under pressure made her an ideal candidate for roles that would have significant impact on military readiness and effectiveness. Within 2 weeks, Maria received orders transferring her to the Army's Training and Doctrine Command, where she would work on developing realistic combat training scenarios based on her first-hand experience in Afghanistan. The position would utilize not just her administrative skills, but her unique perspective as someone who had faced the challenges that future soldiers would encounter in combat zones. The transformation in Maria's career trajectory was remarkable, But equally significant was the change in how she was perceived by those around her. The general's salute had done more than recognize her past service. It had opened the eyes of an entire office to the importance of truly seeing and valuing the people they worked with. Captain Reynolds implemented changes in how the department approached personnel management, ensuring that staff members' full backgrounds and capabilities were considered when making assignments and decisions. The administrative office became a model for how military units could better utilize the diverse talents and experiences of their personnel. 6 months later, Maria found herself standing in front of a classroom filled with young soldiers preparing for their first combat deployment. As she looked out at their faces, some confident, others clearly nervous about what lay ahead, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The training program she had helped develop was making a real difference in preparing soldiers for the realities of combat. Her first-hand experience with IED attacks, enemy contact, and the challenges of operating in hostile environments allowed her to provide insights that textbook training could never match. During one particularly intense training session, a young private approached her with questions about managing fear during combat operations. As Maria shared her own experiences and the lessons she had learned, she realized that General Harrison had been right about the Army's need for instructors who had been where these soldiers were going. The impact of that single moment, a 4-star general choosing to salute a staff sergeant, had rippled outward in ways that none of them could have predicted. It had changed Maria's career, transformed an entire office's approach to recognizing talent, and ultimately contributed to better training for soldiers heading into harm's way. Years later, when Maria had been promoted to Sergeant First Class and was running her own training programs, she would often think back to that morning in the administrative office. The memory of General Harrison's salute served as a reminder of the importance of recognizing excellence wherever it might be found, regardless of rank, position, or circumstance. She began incorporating that lesson into her own leadership style, making sure that every soldier under her command felt seen, valued, and appreciated for their unique contributions. The cycle of recognition and respect that had transformed her own career became something she was determined to pass on to the next generation of military leaders. The story of that salute spread throughout the military community, becoming a powerful example of how true leadership recognizes and honors service regardless of hierarchy. It demonstrated that respect flows both up and down the chain of command, and that sometimes the most profound acts of leadership come not from giving orders but from acknowledging the extraordinary service of those who may have been overlooked by others. For Maria, the general's salute represented more than personal recognition. It was validation that her service and sacrifices had meaning, that her contributions to her country's defense were valued by those who understood their true significance. It restored her faith in an institution she had served with dedication even when that dedication seemed unrecognized. The administrative office where it all began eventually became known throughout the medical center as a place where every person's background and contributions were properly valued. The cultural change that began with a single act of recognition created an environment where excellence was celebrated and potential was nurtured, regardless of someone's current assignment or apparent position in the hierarchy. Maria's story became a testament to the power of recognition, the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, and the profound impact that a single act of respect can have on both individuals and institutions. It demonstrated that heroes come in many forms, and that sometimes the most extraordinary service is found in the most ordinary settings, waiting only for someone with the wisdom and courage to truly see it. The 4-star general's salute to a staff sergeant became more than a moment of military courtesy. It became a symbol of the values that make military service meaningful and the recognition that true leadership means honoring those who serve with distinction, wherever they may be found.